Victory in a civil war is never clean. It is a wound torn open with the family, and though it may be stitched closed with steel and blood, the scar remains. Yagbu Tatsus Pecheneg, the one-armed Khan, stood victorious. The last rebel banners had been trampled into the mud, but the silence that followed the final clash was heavier than the din of battle. It was a silence filled with the ghost of broken oaths and the grim promise of retribution. The physical war was over. The political outrage, the great and terrible house cleansing, was about to begin. For Tatsus, the throbbing phantom pain in his missing arm was a constant reminder that any peace he had hoped to build would have to be paid for in full at a butcher's bill of his own making. And we find ourselves in the main yurt, and Tatsus sits at his table with his advisor. He massages the stump that is what's left of his arm. The advisor speaks. The last of the rebel commanders have been routed, my Khan. The war is won. A war, Tatsus said with his rough voice tired. A war against my own people is never won. It is only ended, but the rot remains. What of my vassal Ibak? Did the emissary succeed? He did, my Khan. The revenge scheme was a success, and now Ibak is a loyal friend to you and your house. He stands obedient on the Kurlatai. Good. One friend amongst the pit of snakes. Now bring the prisoners list. Let us see the names of those who thought that a man with one arm could not hold the kingdom. The first order of business was to deal with traitors who had plunged the realm into chaos. This was not a task Tatsus relished. Every act of tyranny, every necessary cruelty went against the grain of his own generous nature. And it definitely would cause intense stress that made the phantom nerves in his missing arm scream in protest. And as the advisor laid down the first scroll, Tatsus' eyes narrowed as he read the name at the top. He would spit the name like a curse. This one, I hate him. Of all of them, he was the loudest and the most arrogant, and he thought my injury an invitation to ambition. We must revoke his titles and strip him of anything in hopes that he wishes to raise armies against me. My Khan, it will be seen as an act of tyranny. You cannot strip everything. You will only be able to take one at most. And I can only imagine the amount of stress this would cause. I am aware. Do it. I need that land, and I need to make an example. And as the advisor makes note, Tatsus would continue to rub his arm, and his face began to be tightened with pain and frustration. But then came a strange and unsettling discovery. The stress of acting like the tyrant of revoking these titles was a burden. The ultimate act of retribution offered a bizarre and unexpected solace. And his fate? He is your prisoner, my Khan. You can ransom him or no. You know what? There will be no more games. He wasted my time with this war. Execute him. The advisor brows and Tatsus braces for the waves of stress. The familiar guilt of command, but it doesn't come. And instead, a strange sense of calm washes over him, and the throbbing subsides. This is interesting. I guess my generosity is in the death and relieving of the life of my enemies. I will just take your head now instead. Be gone, my enemies. In a dark and twisted irony, Yagbu, who would lean on generosity, found that the only relief from the burdens of his stations was to execute his vassals. And this discovery would shape a brutal axe in the oncoming days. This one holds 2 titles, my Khan. We can only revoke one without incurring the wrath of the other vassals. But his lands are rich. And his heir? He also has a son who is in our prisons. Wait. Pull the list. Let us see what the succession looks like. Yes, I am his heir. If as he and his son were to meet their end, you would inherit everything clearly, my Khan, but to execute them both. But then, as his advisor goes on into rambles of course, the inevitable consequences of his actions, Tatsus would rethink about the civil war that had just happened, the cost, the stains left behind, the constant plotting. Civil war. It may happen. It's just going to happen anyway. They are going to die. This is the surest way to curtail this issue. No. It is the only way to be certain. Arrange it. It was a torment on Tatsus. In order to secure his realm, he had to become a monster in the eyes of his enemies and even of his own people. And each swing of the axe was a blow against his own nature. And it was a necessary butchery to carve out the peace. The generous king was dead. And the survivor, the one-armed butcher, was now making his mark. In the desperate lands in the steppes. He thinks he is the one who can only hold this kingdom together. The great purge that had ensued of Yagbu, Tatsus, Kore continued, and the fate of the rebels were not sealed in the heat of battle, but in the aftermath, in chains and in cold yurts. Some were ransomed for coin to fill the war chest, and others were stripped. Their ancestral lands passed to loyalists or shrewdly to elders with no heirs, ensuring the territory would revert back to the crown. To manage the vast influx of the new domain, Tatsus was forced to create new tributaries and grant titles, and reorganize his kingdom to stabilize his bloody won peace. Yet with every decree signed, with every traitor's fate sealed, the torment within the Yagbu grew, and it was that of a gnawing pain that centered in his arm, a radiating agony that was more than just the memory of his lost arm. It was as if every soul he condemned added a ghostly weight to the limb that was no longer there. The bloodshed had renewed his kingdom, but it was costing him his peace. And then we find ourselves in Tatsus's yurt, gripping his shoulder, and his breathing labored. And his stargazer, his wife, watches him with concern. And as she speaks, "The pain is worse tonight, my husband. It is not the ache of an old wound. This is different. It is heavy, like that of a fire that burns from the inside. The physicians have no answer and their poultices do nothing. That is because they seek to heal your flesh, but it is your spirit that is afflicted. The skies see what has been done, and the ghosts of the slain cling to you. The weight of your crown is forged from their bones, and you feel every ounce of it in the arm that you no longer have. What would you have me do then? Let the traitors live? And let my kingdom fracture? This was the only way. I do not question the path you took, but the hardest path must be, and it must have an end. The eternal blue sky is vast and it sees all. It sees your pain and we must ask it for guidance. And under the vast star-dusted canopy, the stargazer performs the ritual, chanting the ancient Pecheneg prayers. She casts bones and herbs into the roaring fire, and her eyes, searching for the pattern of the smoke and embers, finds an answer to her suffering. The spirits are clear, and your path is born of imbalance. You have spilled the blood of many to secure the earth, and now the earth demands a penance. And to heal your spirit, you must journey towards the heavens. And you must walk the path of a Tengari, and a great pilgrimage is required. You must show your devotion to the blue sky, so it may cleanse the blood from your soul and quiet the ghosts that torment you. And the idea of a pilgrimage, a long journey of faith, settled in his mind. It was a path he hadn't considered. In a strange destination after a campaign of such brutal, earthly violence, it felt right. A way to silence the fire in his shoulders, but before he could commit his soul, there was one last piece of earthly business to conclude, and a bloody message that he had to send. This one. And the one that he referred to was of a troublesome noble by the name of Count Adrian. He thought my generosity was weakness, and I will not allow him to make that mistake again. Decapitate him. And then the axe fell. It was swift and final, but Tatsus was not finished, and he looked upon the head and had a cold idea. The Count has an heir, does he not? A son? An 8-year-old boy, my Khan. Then send him his father's head. It will be a lesson for the boy. And let him understand the price of treason from a young age, and let him feel the chill of true fear. Tatsus expected news of a terrified child, of a house paralyzed by fear, but the report that returned was something else entirely. My Khan, the boy, he did not weep. He looked upon his father's head and swore an oath of vengeance against you. Ha! Tatsus stares and then lets out that short bark. It was devoid of any warmth. A rival? This little 8-year-old? Thought I would scare the living daylights out of him, but instead I've made an enemy. Oh, this world and its humor. Ha! In treks of unexpected defiance, this was the final sign. That Tatsus's methods and his tools for fear and violence would yield unpredictable results. The stargazer was right. A new path was needed, and the path of the sword would end, and the path of the spirit would begin. The great purge was soon coming to a close, and a stillness would be felt across the land. It was not a stillness of peace, but of the quiet of a forest after fire. A grim and smoking silence where all that remains is what was strong enough to endure. And for Tatsus, the decision was made. His stargazer had shown him the path, and now he would walk it. And his sharp, strategic mind, bent on a campaign of conquest and suppression, was now turned to a holy war for his own soul. But before this grand journey could begin, there was one last account to close, and his advisor brought news of the final prisoner and a lord whose son now waited in the wings. My Khan, what is to be done with him? And Tatsus replied, devoid of any anger or surprise, the same as the others, the axe. And send the head to the sun, and let us see what lesson this one learns. The grim errand was performed, but this time the messenger returned not with news of defiance, but of terror. The new heir, upon receiving grisly proof of the Khan's justice, had fallen to his knees, swearing absolute and eternal loyalty. And as Tatsus listened to the report, he gave a single slow nod and quietly spoke. So that is the way of it. Sometimes a rival, sometimes a slave, and the result is just that. There was no triumph in his reaction, no satisfaction. Only the onerous, heavy acceptance of a king who had learned the methods of fear, and with the last of the blood shed, his full attention was turned to the pilgrimage. And this would be no humble trek, but a grand undertaking, befitting of a mighty Khan, designed to show the world and the heavens the power and piety of the Pechenegs. And the Khan's path was one of breathtaking ambitions. His journey would take him through the vast steppes of the south and through the treacherous mountain passes into the ancient lands of the Greeks. And his royal procession would traverse the plains of Thessaly and Macedonia, not as a conqueror, but as a pilgrim. And his gaze was set upon a destination few of his people had seen, the golden domes of Constantinople. And from there his plan was to take to the sea, crossing many dangerous ways like the Aegean and the Great Sea to visit his holy sites. And these journeys would stretch months in hopes of further building his devotion. The undertaking was not left to chance, and Tatsus would hire the finest of mercenaries, elite cataphracts, heavy armored cavalry that would neutralize any threat, and while rugged mountaineers were employed to guide them safely through the passes. This pilgrimage would be a ceremonial one. It would not be for adventure, but the sole accumulation of piety. And in we go, his kingdom secure, his treasury once bleeding gold was now back in the positive. He had won, but as he prepared to leave, the phantom limb ached with a furious burn, and he knew this pain. It was the pain of memory, the ghosts of betrayal, and even with the limb gone, the pain will always remain, much like the treachery of vassals he could never truly forget. In another low whisper, weeds will always grow again. He felt a grim relief, exhaustion of a man who had survived the storm. But who knows, the sky will never completely clear again. And with a deep breath, he would master the pain and swing himself into the saddle and gave the signal to advance. His procession moved, and the one-armed Khan was a butcher who would ride away from his kingdom he had silenced with fear. And he would ride into the distant horizon in search of solace for wounds that he could never show, and a pain that could never truly be severed. And his journey was that into a spiritual procession